Won by the Sword, a board game by GMT that came out 1 or 2 years ago, and when it came out I was enormously excited about it. In my other life, when I'm not playing or reviewing board games, I am a scholar, and among my interests there is the 17th century. I'm interested in 17th century culture, literature, art, history, and therefore I have an interest in the 30 Years' War, which I find to be an event or a macro event of enormous interest. There are just so many interesting aspects to it. It is not actually an event that has been covered in many publications. Every time that somebody writes a book, it has extremely lengthy or extremely short, as they're trying to give a short introduction. And also, there aren't many war games out there about this topic. There is there are some tactical games, the musket and pike system games, also by GMT. I like those very much. There is another game that covers the war with a broader lens, and the one by the Sword promises to be a game about the great campaigns. So I was very interested in this system. Card-driven, Ben Hall, very respectable designer, so a lot of good things about it. Unfortunately, as soon as I started learning the game, things emerged that I found problematic. Clearly there were errata in the rulebook, in the cards. There were just many loopholes. The production had been subpar. I don't know what happened at GMT that day. The editor got drunk or something. Was in the spirit of the 30 Years' War, so was just drinking like a soldier at the time. I don't know what happened, but that was a very disappointing production, and there was such an amount of errata that it made playing the game very hard. And actually, so I decided to give up, and back then I shelved the game waiting for the upgrade kit, which sometimes GMT does as sort of like showing their remorse for their subpar production. They send you updated components, and so recently I got the upgrade kit with new manuals, with different counters, with a different deck of cards, new materials that you integrate with the old ones, replacing some of the old ones, and then you have a game that actually is playable. So finally, some 1 or 2 years after I received the game and I was disappointed by the production, I finally managed to play Won by the Sword, first volume in the Great Campaigns of the 30 Years' War system. Let me show you how the game works. This is the map of the game. It is quite large. It is printed on paper. You will probably want to put it onto a piece of plexiglass to make sure that it lays flat on the table. As you can see, it is a point-to-point map. There are connections all over the map. Two types of connections, really. One is regular connections, represented by solid lines, and the other one is pain-in-the-neck connection. That's a technical term, represented by dotted lines. And then you have towns, strong towns, fortresses, strong fortresses, represented by these areas on the board. And this is where you will have your armies, your columns, your garrisons. And as you can see, there are different shapes for this type of location, and the different shapes represent a different type of fortification, how strong the place is to defend. Many of these names will not be familiar to many of the games, many of these names here on the map. And I don't know, maybe you're from around there, you're gonna say, well, but I live in Gmund, so I know where it is, and every morning I go to the lovely city of Dinkelsbülk to buy pretzel or something. But for most of us, these places are not very familiar. So actually, when you have setup instructions, they tell you, well, why don't you set up some regiments in this or that place, and those names kind of look very similar to one another. For most of us, I think it could have been useful to use the immortal system of dividing the map into squares. You don't even need to draw them on the map. You just write letters there, numbers here, and then in the setup instruction for the scenarios, you give us an indication of where the heck a town or a fortress is. I found that setup took me longer than I thought it was necessary. If I had had that player aid, that would have been of great help to me. Moving closer to the map, let's talk about the things that go on that map. Garrisons. You will have a lot of garrisons on the map. The counters representing garrisons are double-sided, a side for each main alliance in the game. As you can see, the background color is very similar. It's pretty much the same, just the banners change, and this side here is slightly darker than the other one, or vice versa. Could have been easier to identify garrisons on the board if the background colors for the two sides of the counters had been different. But you will have garrisons on the board, and you will have a garrison indicating, well, that there is a garrison to start with. And under that, you will have a counter representing the force that is hidden in that area. Yes, hidden, this is very important. You do not know exactly what you're getting yourself into when you approach an enemy garrison. There may be a very strong group of defenders there, not such a strong group. Who knows? You have to go and mess with them to really figure it out. Other pieces that will go on the board, columns. The main military formations in the game are columns. You have these sort of tokens here that you've seen also in other games. GMT has several games that uses this sort of like big vertical game piece here. And the columns simply indicate where large groups of military units are. The exact composition of such military units is recorded on the force cards. On the force card, that each player has one. Each player can have up to 4 columns in play. This is why you have 4 spaces on the force card, and each force card has an area for each column where you will place tokens representing cavalry. Cavalry units are represented by a triangular banner, such as that one, and they can be regular or they can be veteran, as marked by that V. You have a place for infantry units. Infantry units are marked by square banners, and again, they can be veteran or not veteran. Here's a non-veteran unit. Then we have artillery that goes here, and baggage. Oh, so important. Baggage points. Your columns were moving. Oh, they do eat a lot. They do work an appetite as they go around, destroy cities, and fight battles. So you constantly need to forage to collect baggage points. There are also other procedures that give you baggage points. And as your columns activate, you need to spend baggage points. If you don't have them, then your activated column will take step losses. Not cool. And yeah, you have an area in the force card where you can also keep track of the number of baggage points that the moving column has. Also very important, so we have leaders, military leaders, so various level from the generic ones to the named ones. Then we have the superstars, and we also have leaders that come with here I wanted to show you the superstar of them all, and leaders also come, the good ones, with pools of chits representing special abilities that they have. So this is the main idea. These are the main people involved in the contest. To activate these people so they can do stuff and go around messing Central Europe for everybody, you will use cards. This is a card-driven game, and these cards have several sections, and differently from, I guess, most other card-driven war games that I know, if not all of them. In these cards, you use every section. It's like the pig. You don't throw anything away. You use every section of the card. This section here tells you the number of campaign points that a column uses when you activate it playing that card. I want to activate that column, I play that card for it, boom, it has 4 campaign points that I can use to perform various actions. This is the number of baggage points that the unit, that the column spends when activating, depending on the size. Small columns only on this card spend a single point. 2 points for a medium, 4 points for a large one. As you can see, depending on the card that you have, different types, different amounts of expenditure will be required. And how do you determine the size of the column? Well, this is one element of the game that's a little bit fiddly, requires a little bit of bookkeeping, maybe too much for some players. You do need to keep a running updated tally of how many points you have in each column that you move, because between 1 and 25 points a column is a small one, 26 to 50 it is a medium one, over 50 it is a large one. Yeah, so when you move large columns, well, for a while, until I take a couple of hits, I know that probably it still looks like a big column. Then you check, oh, okay, 49, and now it is a medium one. All right, I spent fewer points. So you need to keep a running count of the number of points that you have in each column, so that that you know which section of this part of the card you use when you activate a column, and then you simply add when you receive reinforcements, keep track of the points that you lose in combat or step losses for other game effects, and so on and so forth. You also have text effects, so that again is not an either or like in so many other games. You get everything. This you spend, this you get, and this also you get. So you have a variety of nice effects that you can implement depending on the cards, from Technical Advantage, Impress, Local Labor. You're such a charismatic leader, then the locals are like, whoa, I'm so impressed, I'm gonna go and help that person. Sorta. That's not how it is, I guess. But you have a variety of interesting things that will happen. Scorched Earth, like you can expect here when players are really using Forage, both as a form of sustenance and also as a form of economic warfare. A big element in the game is foraging in enemy lands, and so exploiting the land's capabilities. Each turn, or I should say each round, you will activate all of your columns. And the procedure to activate the columns depends on the number of columns that you have. 1, 2, 3, or 4 columns, we said that's the available options. If you have 1 or 2 columns, then you simply choose cards from your hand to activate them. So suppose that's I only have these 2 columns, then I decide to activate that column, I play a card for it, I resolve my activation, then the opponent activates one of their columns, then I activate my second column, choose a card from my hand, activate it, boom, resolve that. But suppose that I have 3 columns, then things get trickier, because to simulate lack of coordination, difficulties in planning ahead when you have many columns moving, when you activate a 3rd or 4th column, you do not get to play cards from your hand, selecting what you want to do. You are forced to draw cards from the deck, and you get what you get, and you don't get upset. So 2 columns, you decide how to activate based on the options you have in your hand. The other 2 columns, if you have a 3rd or 4th column, then you have to deal with the higher degree of randomness in the activation. I like that factor, I like that element very much. It's an advantage to having more columns, more flexibility, more mobility, but this is also a game where actually you want to concentrate strength in specific points. But it's nice, the fact that it is nice to have the option in the game to split a column into smaller columns, reabsorbing columns. But if you have many columns, then you have all these logistical problems, which are well captured in this mechanic here. So we spend campaign points to activate our columns, but what the heck do we do with those points? Well, we have a very nice player aid here that helps us figuring that out. We can spend campaign points to move on a solid line or a dotted line. As you can see, it's more expensive to move on dotted lines. And also here we have the expenditure in terms of baggage points when we are performing specific actions. Again, also remember there is the other expenditure here. We can spend campaign points to form for battle or open a siege. We'll talk about that. Fatigue, that's an effect that you receive for certain game functions and from battles, and you need to spend campaign points to reduce fatigue before you can perform other actions. Forage, as we said, super important, allows you to collect baggage points and other actions such as constructing siege works, assaulting fortifications, passing through enemy patrols, and so on and so forth. But these are the main things. Moving, starting battles, starting performing sieges, working on sieges, and foraging. As for forage, we'll look at the forage result table and we simply roll a die, which is a d10 in this game, apply modifiers and see how much we gain, and also the stress that we put on the area that we're foraging. If an area has a F2 marker, it cannot be foraged again until the marker is reduced. So you cannot keep milking the same area over and over again, which makes perfect sense, of course. We talked about moving, and that is pretty self-explanatory. Spend campaign points and baggage points to move, but then siege is such an important element of the war that we are gaming here, and such an important element of the game. We have a detailed, don't be scared, a little combat procedure that on the player aid related to siege, and well, there are several steps. First, you need to have a sufficient number of infantry steps, depending on the type of siege that you're launching. There is a different amount of infantry steps that you need to have with you, based also on the type of urban center that you are besieging or you're decided to besiege. Then you make them, if you have the required strength, the required size, you make them an initial surrender offer. You're just hoping that maybe they'll give up easy, save us all a big deal of trouble. And then you roll on this table here, apply modifiers based on the number of steps in the garrison. We'll see if they reject or accept the offer. If they accept the offer, hooray, you take control of the place that you didn't really have to siege. Actually, we were able to resolve things amicably. Otherwise, alas, it's time to start constructing siege works. Each siege, well, you will mark with a marker there just to indicate where the siege is taking place, and also you have various markers for various sieges. As you can see, there are numbers, so I can tell siege 1 from siege 2 and siege 3 and so on and so forth, because each siege also gets 2 other markers. So one is the level of siege works that is required to be able to launch a final assault against that place, and the other one is the level of siege works that have actually been built. When this marker reaches this one, then is when interesting stuff starts happening. And you have a track here, which is the siege and victory point track, where you place the required level based on the location that you are besieging and the siege work builds that are at 0 at the beginning. So when you're in this situation here, you can spend campaign points to build siege works. There may also be other game effects that affect that, and also artillery. The place that you're besieging may have inherent artillery, in which case the besieged player may fire against your siege works, the ones that you built, and you yourself can fire against their fortifications to reduce the level of siege works that are required. As we said, you're trying to, as the besieger, to get those 2 markers in the same place, or to have your siege works exceed the required number. A couple of other things may happen in the meanwhile or around that general idea, as again beautifully summarized in this player aid here. There may be an escalade, which is a surprise attack, may occur under certain circumstances that allows you to try to inflict some damage before completing the siege works. As we talked about the bombardments, and there can be a sally. The besieged garrison may try to send a portion of their garrison to attack the siege works. Finally, you may have a final surrender offer, again rolled on this table here. Either really stubborn, you have built enough siege works, but they still haven't surrendered, then you assault and you resolve the assault procedure, which is a form of battle. Now, battles, there are two types of battle. A minor battle, when simply players total the number of strength points that they have and they send them against each other, and they roll simply numerically, doesn't have a tactical element. But then you also have larger battles when both sides have at least 10 infantry regiments and 2 cavalry regiments. Major battle takes place when we have large columns, large forces meeting, and the attacker will offer battle. The defender will say, oh, sure, why not? That's a lovely offer. I'm gonna join in this exciting battle. When you resolve a major battle, first the attacker, well, you first use this player aid here, and the attacker places all their infantry in the central area and the cavalry in the wings, and you place the wings, you divide the wings as evenly as possible. Then the defender does the same, infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings. And after you placed that initial, you form the initial organization of the battle. When you have that, then the players can reorganize here. They can shift the cavalry around, you can shift some of your infantry on the wings. And then you resolve the battle pretty much in 3 mini battles. A wing attacks the corresponding wing, another wing attacks the corresponding wing. The force that inflicted the most hits in each of the wing battles gets a chance of reinforcing the center, so you can switch and move things around during battle. And then after you resolved the wing mini battles and possibly reinforce the center, you resolve the battle in the central area. Actually, during the battle, before the main battle, you also fight artillery, which also attacks the central area. And so, at the end, you have a third mini battle, which involves the centers and the possible reinforcements from the wings. In all of these battles, the winner is the player that inflicts the most hits on the opponent, and then based on that, you determine if you had a major victory, a minor victory, how much fatigue you get, and so on and so forth. What is interesting, and I didn't mention it until now, is the combat system. When I first opened the player aid, I expected the combat table to be most of the central part of the player aid. You know, I thought, okay, here's the combat table, here are some modifiers, maybe a secondary table. Then I looked around, where the heck is the combat table? Well, now I'm showing it to you right there, but at the beginning I couldn't find it. It's so small, I had no idea that a game of this depth could survive around the combat table that was so small and so intuitive, so linear, straightforward. You don't see such a simple combat table very often in games of this scope. And this is used for every form of combat, for bombardment, cavalry attacks, minor battles, the 3 mini battles that go together to form a large battle. And they all work in the same way. When you need to resolve an attack against the opponent, you add the individual firepower of each unit involved in the attack. You roll a die, you add it to the total, and that's it. And that tells the number of hits that you generate. And that's when both players attack, then is also the number of hits is also the number that you need to compare to determine who the winner in each situation is. That's it. Combat is extremely simple. As you can see, it takes place in various moments, in various situations on the board, from the bombardment during the siege, minor battles, larger battles, but it's always the same, and it's very nice that we have that very simple and reliable system to resolve all form of military confrontations, of violent confrontations in the game. The game can be played in a variety of scenarios. You have a pretty thick playbook full of scenarios, very different from one another. And different scenarios will also have different victory conditions, different ways for you to score victory points, but usually foraging in enemy territory is a good way of scoring victory points because it simulates the economic losses that you're inflicting on the opponent. Well, it certainly took me a while to finally be able to play this game, but I'm really happy that I did. I like it, I like it, I like it. I think it's a great game. I think it's a great system. I do not know why Volume 1 covers the second half of the 30 Years' War, as the scenarios here start from the 1630s. Actually, I kind of have a sense because those are the years that involve Gustav Adolf, who is the most interesting personality in the war, in my very humble opinion. And maybe they wanted to give you a chance of playing with that character, with that historical figure of enormous fascination for many who are interested in the topic. So they wanted to start with a strong period, and then they'll give us, once you're hooked with the system, then they will give us maybe earlier battles that are not nearly as iconic as the ones where Gustav Adolf was present. Strange thing about Volume 1 for the second half, but that's a very minor thing. Actually, I'm just pointing it out. I don't know why. To be complete, maybe. The game is strong. The game is very solid. And wow, it's unbelievable that I almost missed that. It really didn't look all that solid when I first tried to learn it back in the day. It really shows you how a poor production can completely mar a game experience that has a lot to give, as this is. And this game can give you a very immersive, very intense game experience. It's not a complex game. That's a great thing. The manual is some 16, 17 pages. Definitely not a scary manual for people that play war games. But the procedures that you have to implement in playing the game actually are somewhat demanding. Again, nothing strange for war gamers, for the strange subspecies of man, and even smaller subspecies of women that call themselves wargamers. Nothing that we haven't seen or done before. For players that are casual gamers, do not play war games very often. Again, it's not the number of rules that you have to keep in mind or the interlocking of the mechanics that is demanding. Simply the implementation of the procedures requires bookkeeping, requires keeping track of various factors, requires going through many steps of a procedure that after a while becomes familiar, with the siege procedure in particular, which has many possible steps. At the beginning feels laborious. So it gets better as the system sinks in and becomes second nature. Still, I feel that it is a game that really requires committed players, requires war gamers. Not necessarily, I would say, experienced war gamers, because you can learn the game easily, but committed war gamers. So actually, if you are a new war gamer, but you want to put in the work of going through all the steps and the procedures, then this may be a game for you. Because when you put in that effort, which again is nothing spectacularly difficult for war gamers, when you put in that system, then you really have an intense game that gives you all that I want to see in a game about this specific topic. It really has all of the elements that I enjoy when I read or learn about the 30 Years' War. You have the personalities, you have these bigger than life people, Gustav Adolf, Tilly, and they are really captured here. You don't just have the chit that moves on the table, well, not really, stays in the column display, but you know what I mean, it's there ideally, but you have the chits that allow you to perform different things with them. So you have flavor, you have personality, you have unique abilities there. Good, check. That's something that I want in a game about the 30 Years' War. If Gustav Adolf doesn't somehow stand out from the background, something is missing. So check, good. What else do we want? I want interesting battles with a certain heaviness. I want to see the sense of these large, heavy formations that march against each other, that have limited mobility, but they still have some. And here I think that the system that you use to resolve the large battles captures that. It does capture the dynamic quality of the cavalry wings, but then at the same time it captures the core, the gravity center that the center represents. And so you have the clash between the two centers. You have the artillery, very nice. And again, you want to see the artillery doing its job in a game about this period. It feels very historical while remaining very simple. I can't tell you how miraculous it is to me that we have a system that has so much historical flavor, so much historical detail, and remains so playable as it revolves around such a simple, linear, almost, I'd say, minimalistic combat table. So you have those battles that once they start, well, there isn't much that you can do about them. It's like you go with the flow. Well, you can still reinforce and stuff like that, but still, and you have tactical cheats in some cases, but still you do have the sense that your decisions are before the battle starts, and placing the wings, choosing where to concentrate your forces, all interesting decisions. So sometimes you will have these sort of like revolving door battles with a strong cavalry wing pushing against a weak one and the opponent doing the same on the opposite side. Sometimes you have frontal confrontation, almost look like phalanxes clashing against each other. Fun. The large battles are fun. Check. That's something that I want, again, in a game about this topic. Even if it were resolved, if the battles were resolved in a little more of an abstract way, I would still be happy because there's so many other good things about this design. But then actually you do have this sense of a tactical feel, which is again very simple, very linear, but you do have that degree of historical quality, which I enjoy very much. What else do we need here? We need sieges, we need armies that give towns and cities a hard time. Because if you cannot burn down a city or two, is not the 30 Years' War. It's not the same, really, let's face it. Check, you do have that, and you have the siege procedure here, which works very well. Sieges are incredibly difficult, I find, to represent in wargaming, because they're boring. The real ones are boring in a broader sense. We know that, of course, there is a lot of tension, because even as the besieger, you do not know the opponents have some tricks up their sleeve. They're preparing some raids from within the walls. You do not know if a column of the opponent is coming. The people in the town are really worried because they are besieged. So I wouldn't say boring, but I would say monotonous, historically speaking, talking about the theme. And when you try to capture that in game mechanics, it's hard because you just have your pieces sitting there without doing much, turn after turn after turn. Here the game resolves that the problem of capturing a monotonous, tedious event in an interesting game form by giving you all those different steps of the procedures. It's interesting that you try to be friendly with them. They say, no, fine, I'm gonna besiege you then. They can attempt a raid, you can attempt different actions, you spend resources, and it's sort of like a race to see which of the two sides will manage to keep the advantage. The besieger with different actions that the two sides can play to manipulate the level of siege works required and siege works built. Really fun stuff. And again, I have to tell you, games kind of like at this scale that I played in the past that tend to incorporate sieges in some level of detail were not that successful. The first thing that came to mind to me as I read the rules about sieges in this game was a game that I played a couple of years ago called Lash of the Turk. It incorporates sieges more or less at this level, at this scale here, and they just feel too laborious. They just felt too much like a choose your own adventure, pick a path sort of like net of options and things that come out of one another. It felt too procedural. Here, I think that yes, you have a procedure, yes, you have to become familiar with it, but really the theme shines through it, and really it just gets to the point where if you had one more step, one more detail, then it would become too cumbersome. But as is, to me, it does all that it needs to do to capture the theme, to give you the sense of all the nuances that may happen around a siege in this period in time, without getting to a level of complexity where the mechanics will blur the historical picture. So what else we have? Sieges, check. We got those two. all that we need, all that we may want from a game about a 30-year war. The big personalities, the large armies that fight in a specific way with the balance between the heavy center, or the dynamic interaction between the heavy center and the mobile wings, and siege procedures that feel historical and thematic without being cumbersome mechanically. Won by the Sword is fun. It's a fun game. Oh, I almost forgot. It's also card driven, and I also like the semi-random way in which you play cards. There's already a random element when you're playing cards in a card-driven game, but you're controlling your hand of cards. There are ways to mitigate randomness, but the fact that sometimes if you want to extend your armies, communication lines are what they are, which means they aren't. They are not very effective. Coordination is virtually impossible, and that is simulated by the randomness of drawing cards that way. I really like that aspect. All of these elements go together very well. Even with the upgraded kit, as I said, there's still many moving parts in the design, and there's still a certain procedural effort that you need to put in. So it is still a game that requires some dedication for new players that want to give it a try, that want to see what the game is about, and that want to experience what the design has to offer. But for those who are willing to do that little bit of work, then Won by the Sword is definitely a great game experience, a great war game experience. It is historical. It feels historical, it feels thematic, it has a lot of interesting choices and decisions, really tough moments, really tough dilemmas that you have because your resources, the number of people that you have are never enough to do all that you want, because the actions are never enough to do all that you want, because you like to push your people, but then you also need to force them. These people need to be fed all the time. Why didn't they just bring a snack from home, like a lunch or something? So you have all of these dilemmas that make the experience feel very, very material. It does capture that material quality of these people that get tired, that need to be fed all the time, that deal with civilian population, with struggle and tension, and it also from time to time clash against each other in brutal, gruesome confrontations. Won by the Sword, an excellent game about the 30 Years' War. I'm glad that this game exists because I think we need more game about this fascinating topic. I'm glad that the game is this good, and I'm glad also that I finally got to play. Two big muskets, no, a big musket and a big pike from me about Won by the Sword by GMT. Really good game. Really, really, really good.